Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Captain's Log, the show devoted to discussions and insights into pop culture with an emphasis on cinema and the occasional themed episodes. This is your captain speaking, Jose Valle. Tonight marks the final episode of our special Halloween-themed month. So relax, turn your lights off, turn the volume up, and prepare for tonight's special presentation. Two truly unsettling film recommendations and terrifying tales assembled from the darkest corners of the internet. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's episode, The Witching Hour. Welcome back to Captain's Log. Let's dive right into Did You See the News? Did you see that news that topping the box office as Universal's release of Blumhouse and Miramax's Halloween? The horror hit dipped by 58% its second weekend and delivered an estimated $32 million worldwide, as its domestic cume now climbs over $126 million after just 10 days in release, all on a reported $10 million budget. Halloween is also the number one film internationally, delivering $25.6 million so far. The biggest news, however, might be that the month of October is now the highest grossing October of all time, with grosses topping $784 million with 3 days in the month left to go on. Did you see that news that 3 years after it premiered in Toronto, Amber Heard's London Fields finally hit theaters this weekend, setting a record as the second worst wide release opening in box office history. Released by GVN Releasing on 613 screens, the film only grossed $160,000, with a per-screen average of $262. Did you see the news that Jonah Hill's Mid-90s posted a big debut in the indie box office? Mid-90s is a directorial debut of Hill, and it centers around a 13-year-old played by Sonny Suljic, living in 1995 Los Angeles with his abusive brother, and played by Lucas Hedges, and his single mother, played by Catherine Waterston, as he joins a skateboarding crew filled with some questionable skaters. Did you see the news that Boba Fett is no longer getting his own spin-off movie? News emerged in May that Disney and Lucasfilm had been developing a Star Wars standalone centered on the bounty hunter Boba Fett from Logan director James Mangold. Although the project was never officially announced, Variety has learned that Lucasfilm is no longer developing the Boba Fett movie project. Disney and Lucasfilm had no comment on Friday, and that's all the news we have. So let's begin our show. Michael Myers, evil incarnate, the man who murdered his sister when he was just 6 years old and murdered 5 teenagers in 1978, is back. And oh boy, you gotta see this. This new Halloween takes place 40 years after the original John Carpenter film and ignores all the other films that came after. I won't give anything else away about the plot, but I'll give you 3 reasons why you have to see it: the cinematography, the story, and the theme. The shots in this film are beautiful, nothing groundbreaking, but still aesthetically pleasing, especially the ones involving Michael. The lighting and composition are done brilliantly and in a manner that makes you fear Myers, presenting him as a force to be feared. Then, there's the outdoor shots taking place on Halloween night, which make you feel the dread of the situation and make you understand why you should fear that night. Then there's a story, which was written by Danny McBride, David Gordon Green, who also directed the film, and Jeff Bradley. The story that works so well and is worthy enough to follow Carpenter's original masterpiece. The story that has everything that made the original work whilst adding what makes slashers so good: more gore and more humor. But the humor is not forced, nor cringy. It is organic and well done. And last but not least, my favorite part, the usage of the iconic theme. The theme that gave me nightmares as a child and still chills me to the bone today. The theme is brought back brilliantly in this movie in all its original synthy glory. I won't say anything else because it'll ruin the magic and feel for you. I cannot stress how much you need to see this movie this Halloween season. And also this one. In 1981, Sam Raimi had an idea and $350,000 that he had raised, a small crew, and limited equipment. And with all that, he created one of the most unsettling, graphic, and strange films to ever hit the big screen. Evil Dead. Oh, this movie. The plot is pretty simple. Ash Williams, played by a very young Bruce Campbell, his girlfriend, his sister, and 2 other friends venture into the woods to a cabin for a night away. There, they find an old book called the Necronomicon, whose text reawakens the dead when it's read aloud. The friends inadvertently release a flood of evil and must fight for their lives. The film is a must-watch. I didn't include it in the list because I wanted to talk about this one more in depth. This film feels like it was filmed by a group of college kids in some cabin they stumbled upon, which, isn't that far off, as Raimi was in his very early 20s when he created the film, and, Campbell and Raimi had studied filmmaking together when Raimi approached Campbell with the idea, and the two did everything they could to make it happen. I mean, there was so much work that went into this film. This film was not a big budget production. And that's what I love about this film so much, is that it feels as if it's something my friends and I could have made. And when I learned what went on behind the scenes, it makes me appreciate it even more. For instance, the cabin used in the film set was also used as lodging for 13 crew members, with several people sleeping in the same room. Living conditions were terrible, and the crew frequently argued. The actors went days without showering or bathing. The cabin didn't have plumbing, and fell ill frequently in the freezing weather. Things got so bad that by the end of production, they were burning furniture to stay warm. After days of shooting, Bruce Campbell would have to get in the back of a pickup truck because he was so drenched in fake blood. Then there's the actual film, which is just horrifying. Genuinely scary. It is one of the smallest of films to earn the NC-17 rating. The effects are not great by today's standards, but they are done so disgustingly that they might as well be the best CGI has to offer. And the acting is again not great, but the shots, the ingenuity, the way that Raimi shows us the movement of the evil force with the camera, the way he flows through the woods and over the lakes, the way he creeps around the cabin, or the way he attacks the characters. Brilliant. One of the things that freaked me out the most about this film was how the characters acted when they became possessed. The makeup is disgusting and creepy, and the movements and sounds that come from them, gross. It's a film that you have to watch around Halloween time, and that you definitely have to watch before you die. In folklore, the witching hour is a time associated with supernatural events. Creatures, such as witches, demons, and ghosts, are believed to appear and be at their most powerful, and able to interact with the mortal souls of our plane, leaving them with memories of strange encounters and even stranger nightmares. The tales that I'm about to read represent the terror and frightening nature of the witching hour. These tales have been assembled from the darkest and eeriest corners of the internet, and their credibility can be questioned, but I'm merely here to present them. So let's turn the lights down low and begin our tales of suspense. The summer before my last year of college, I lived in a treehouse on a friend's property on a large island. Set back in the woods a bit, it was pretty secluded. I loved it. It was quiet, and I could do pretty much whatever I wanted to, which usually involved an entire 6-pack of PBR, nudity, a pellet gun, and Grace Slick on vinyl. There was an extension cord running from the workshop up to my tree dwelling, allowing for a few lights, a record player, and a cell phone charger. One night, after a long day of working, a fun but tiring tourist town retail job, I came home, grabbed a beer, ditched my pants, and got to work. I stayed up pretty late, maybe 2 a.m., then tucked myself into bed. To preface, I experience sleep paralysis a few times per year, usually when I'm stressed out. This was something entirely different. I woke up sometime later, maybe a few hours. It was still dark. There was a shrill noise ringing through my head, almost like a high-pitched static. My eyes popped open, and the entire treehouse was glowing red. My body felt like it was buzzing. I could look around, but I couldn't move. Slowly, the red light, the vibration in my core, and the noise faded out, pretty much in sync. Once they had all disappeared completely, I could move again. Breathing heavily, I sat up and turned on my lamp. The horses in the barn next door were losing their shit. I was so freaked out I couldn't get back to sleep for hours. I tried to read a book, but I couldn't concentrate. Finally, as the sun started to rise, I dozed off again. When I woke up, I went into the property owner's house. Part of the rental deal included some bathroom, kitchen, and laundry access, and I made some oatmeal. I was still freaked out, but happy to have slept. A few hours later, I headed into work. Here is where it gets creepier. I work with this awesome woman who is now one of my closest friends. We'll call her Kelly for privacy's sake. As soon as I walked in, she noticed how tired I was. Throughout the evening, I was just kind of floating with my mind elsewhere. "Come here," she beckoned, when the shop had cleared out around dinner time. "What's going on with you?" I told her about the red light and the paralysis and the noise and the horses. She nodded. "Let me tell you something," she started. "There's some really fucked up juju on this island." She went on to tell me this story. When she was a kid, growing up on the other side of the island, her grandparents owned a big piece of property with a small farm. One evening, she was there with her family, including parents, siblings, cousins, aunts, and uncles, when her grandmother called everyone in for dinner. The kids came running and left toys all over the yard. After the meal, her grandfather offered to pick up after the kids. When he came back in about 10 minutes later, he didn't have any of the toys with him. He looked like he had seen a ghost, and his face was as white as a sheet. "What's wrong with you?" asked her grandmother. He shook his head and went straight to bed. Some of the adults went out into the yard to, check the situation. The toys were right where all the kids had left them. The field up beyond the yard was smoldering. Worried there had been a brush fire, everyone walked up to check it out. When they got there was a perfect circular ring, about 6 feet across, burned into the tall grass. The grass never grew back, and Kelly said she always got a weird feeling whenever she got near the circle. Her grandfather wouldn't mow near it, and everyone who saw it just picked up bad vibes. "This isn't the first time they've been here," she added. "They come all the time. My son used to see them when he was little, and he would try to talk to them." "Who?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He just called them the Green Men. My parents used to live in a small subdivision, about 45 minutes outside of Seattle. According to them, it was relatively normal middle-class development with decent neighbors. Of course, there were the occasional scream-filled arguments from the newlyweds across the street, but nothing one would consider out of the ordinary. Tonight they explained to me why they moved across the country to the outskirts of New York. My dad was really good friends with the family right next door, but the breadwinner was offered a posh new job in upstate New York. "Damn it, Richard. So you're leaving us? Who's going to host the 4th of July barbecue now?" He was pretty upset, but my mom said he got over it pretty quickly. 3 weekends later, the Snyder's house was put up for sale, and they were long gone. My mom didn't really get along with the wife, so she was really excited to see who would move in next door to them. But that excitement was short-lived. There was something off-putting about them. That was my mom's reaction the first time she saw the new neighbors. They weren't constantly smiling. 24/7, the smiles never left their faces, and they were wider than bed sheets, like they never went outside or something. My dad chimed in. Yeah, and your mother wasn't being overly judgmental either. They were, they just looked different. That's the only way I can describe it to you. They didn't just write them off, though. My parents aren't like that. After they were situated in their new home, my mom baked them cookies, and they both went over to introduce themselves. The new neighbors answered the door, shoulder to shoulder, the thin-lipped smile still plastered on their pale faces. My dad said they looked exhausted, and their grins stayed. Hey, how are you? We live right next door. We thought we would, introduce ourselves and, welcome you to the neighborhood. Thank you. Please come inside, sir and ma'am. We like you, and you're always welcome here. Always. My parents stayed for about an hour, and during that time, barely any words were exchanged. They both tried asking questions about their careers, previous locations, etc., but the only things they said were very short and vague. The questions were never reciprocated, and they sat on their couch shoulder to shoulder the entire time, even when my parents left their house. We sort of waited for them to walk us to the front door, but they really just sat there. Okay, that's really, really strange, I said. Andrew, listen to us. That's just scratching the surface of who these people really were. The weeks that followed were surreal and terrifying. We decided we're just going to tell you everything, but you have to promise us that you won't be scared or anything. I should have just walked out of the room at this point. Things started to become odd on the third day after they moved in, because all of their boxes weren't even unpacked when the husband began painting their house exactly like my parents'. Theirs was a light cream color with a thin blue stripe around the perimeter, and by the end of the day, so was the house next door. Apparently, my parents didn't bring it up right away. The next day, my dad was out mowing the lawn, and so was the man. He was wearing the same hat and using the same brand and model of mower. That upset me, so I sort of confronted him about it. I wasn't aggressive or anything, but I insinuated how there was no way that was just a coincidence, especially since he had painted the house to look just like ours the day before. He just looked at me with that ominous smile and didn't say a word. It was weirding both of us out, so we watched them intently for a few weeks, and it just got more and more insane as the days went by. A week after the house painting incident, the neighbors next door decided to purchase a new vehicle, and you guessed it. It was the same car as my parents, a 1987 BMW 3 Series convertible in red. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. The next day, my dad invited himself over to ask them some questions. I just tagged along for the ride, my mom said. I was just curious as to what they had to say about all this. When they got there, the neighbors opened the door, shoulder to shoulder, just like last time. Their smiles were wider than ever. Welcome back, sir and ma'am. Yeah, okay, can we talk for a second? I just need to ask you guys some things, all right? Yes, please, come in. They stepped inside and sat down with them. Listen, we're just wondering why you're, copying us. I honestly just want to mind my own business, but it's getting kind of weird. Wouldn't you agree? They paused for a minute, looking at each other, and responded, We like our neighbors. We like you. My dad noticed something was upsetting my mom at this point. Her face went flush, and she grabbed his leg. What's wrong? She whispered to him under her breath. James, we need to get out of here. We need to leave right now. Sorry, guys, we need to go. My wife isn't, feeling very well. They left in a hurry. My dad was flustered with my mom asking what the fuck was going on and why she got so upset all of a sudden. They got home and she slammed the door. Jesus Christ, James, Jesus Christ. What the hell's the matter? Can you please just tell me? My mom was almost in tears at this point. James, I looked into their bedroom. They had the door wide open, James. They have the same fucking bedroom as us, the same comforter on their bed, the same pattern as ours. They have the same curtains on their windows and they have the same nightstands that we do. How the fuck would they know that? They've never been into our house before. What the fuck? Are you being serious right now? James, have they been inside our house? I asked them why they didn't just go back there and actually confront them or call the police. But they told me they were just kind of in the denial stage. They didn't want to believe this was actually happening, but they knew it was. They knew exactly what was happening. Neither of them got very much sleep that night. Right before they went to bed, my dad set up an old VHS camcorder on a table in the corner of their room facing their bedroom door. My dad pulled out an old cardboard box full of tapes and popped one into our VHS player. Watch this. He fast-forwarded the tape until about an hour in. I was in disbelief. The video showed the copycat neighbors standing at the edge of my parents' bed, shoulder to shoulder. Their smiles were gone. Instead, they had a murderous look on their faces, wrinkled and contorted. They stood there, just watching my parents through the night, until the grainy video cut out 3 hours in. I nearly had a heart attack when I watched the tape the next morning. I was scared and then extremely angry. I grabbed my baseball bat and sprinted over to their house. No one was answering, so I beat their door down. Jesus. Well, what did you do to them? I asked. They were gone, and all their stuff was neatly boxed up in the living room. The BMW was still there, but they were gone and never came back. We filed a police report that day, and after we showed them the video, they worked extremely hard to find these people. Whoever the hell they were, there were no leads. The information they used to buy the house and the car was stolen from another couple from Arkansas, and there was nothing else on them. We got the hell out of that neighborhood and moved over here for peace of mind. Oh my God, I'm not even sure what to think right now. I'm so sorry. I was truly at a loss for words. I asked them why they waited so long to tell me this story. Remember our old neighbor Richard Snyder we were talking about? Well, I still keep in touch with him occasionally. Okay? And, he called in last night and told me he has some new neighbors. The third day they were there, they painted their house, just like his. In my old apartment, my dog would, on occasion, look down the hallway towards the bedroom, from the living room and growl, for no apparent reason. Also, on occasion, when I was sleeping in the bedroom, she slept at the foot of the bed. I would wake up with her staring intently at the door and growling. She was a big girl, 140 pounds of Great Dane, Catahoula, and slobber. So I'm there for a couple of years on this, thinking, okay, my dog has a good imagination. Wrong. One night I woke up, due not to my dog growling, but barking for all she was worth. And not at the door. She was barking straight at me. I opened my eyes pretty much immediately, and there was a blur of light leaning over me, very close, certainly less than 6 inches from my face. It was not distinguishable as a person. It more resembled a person-sized version of a colorful nebula you might see a picture of in a science magazine, 3-dimensional and all. I immediately got the distinct impression that this thing had been watching me sleep for God knows how long, and how many times before. For all the clarity of that distinct feeling, I had no sense of what it wanted, whether it was malevolent or just curious. I flipped right the fuck out, jumped backwards onto the other side of the bed, too terrified to scream, and that blur of light receded and disappeared over the course of about 3 seconds. My dog was absolutely going ape. So shortly thereafter, I asked the building manager if anybody had ever died there. She investigated that and came back to me a couple of weeks later with a yes. A woman had died of a drug overdose in that apartment in 1995, So 12 years earlier, shortly after having her child removed from her custody because of her addiction problems, my dog did still growl at the hallway from time to time, but I never saw it again. Have you ever walked into a room and found a vampire? No, not the sexy kind, but a foul creature with bony limbs and ashen skin. The kind that snarls as you enter like a beast about to pounce. The kind that roots you to the spot with its sunken hypnotic eyes, rendering you unable to flee as you watch the hideous thing uncoil from the shadows. Has your heart started racing, though your legs refuse to? Have you felt time slow as the creature crosses a room in the darkness of a blink? Have you shuddered with fear when it places one clawed hand atop your head and another underneath your chin so it can tilt you, exposing your neck? Have you squirmed as its rough, dry tongue slides down your cheek, over your jaw to your throat, in a slithering search that's seeking your artery? Have you felt its hot breath release in a hiss against your skin when it probes your pulse, the flow that leads to your brain? Has its tongue rested there, throbbing slightly as if savoring the moment? Have you then experienced a sinking, sucking blackness as you discover that not all vampires feed on blood? Some feed on memories. Well, have you? Maybe not. But let me rephrase the question. Have you ever walked into a room and suddenly forgotten why you came in? I grew up on an Indian reservation in the Dakotas. My father became rather traditional as he got older, and being aware of the spirits that are constantly around us is a huge part of Sioux spirituality. The Cheyenne believe that once something terrible happens in a place, it never stops happening. The reservation is/was home to some of the worst atrocities on record, and so the idea of people hanging around after their deaths was not foreign to us. I was raised to believe that it was perfectly normal, if not desired, to be able to see things that non-natives couldn't. I grew up in a town that had been home to the most traditional of the traditional. A great war leader was said to have been buried along the banks of the creek that ran through the town, and the traditional natives flocked there to practice their religion relatively safely after a horrible massacre had happened in the 1890s. Drug and alcohol abuse had slowly taken over, however, and the one spiritual refuge of the reservation had become a hotspot for rape, murder, suicide, and other untimely endings. When I was in 6th grade, my father worked at the community school. Since it was a small town, the school taught grades K through 8. He came home troubled one day because the kindergarten class claimed to all have seen a girl who appeared to be dead, throat slit, with blackened eyes, staring in at them from the hallway. They had simultaneously started screaming and gesturing toward the door. Their non-native teacher was convinced that the kids were all in on some kind of prank. But my dad thought that the appearance of the girl was a sign of things to come, and it was. It was the beginning of what my family refers to in hushed tones as the creepy year. For no apparent reason, kids started committing suicide down by the creek that ran through the town, one after the other. Kids would go down to the same spot and end their lives. A reservation-wide emergency was called, and we had to sit in on countless assemblies regarding suicide prevention. Still, the suicides continued, and by the end of the month, 4 or 5 kids had died down there. Soon after the first wave of suicides, a large black car with tinted windows began popping up around town. People mentioned it casually at first, as it was strange to see a new car in a place where everyone knew each other's rides. Then the car began doing weird things. One of my cousins was driving home from a friend's house late one night when the car appeared right behind her. Its brights were on, and it was tailgating her so closely that she found herself going 90 miles per hour just to keep from getting hit. Then, as she drove past the school, the car disappeared into thin air. Just gone. The car began appearing more and more. It attempted to run several people off the road, and everyone was really, really scared. Whatever was in the car became stronger. It would pull up to the houses where the kids who committed suicide had lived and just sit in the darkness with the engine idling. People who drove by it would see the outlines of 5 people sitting in the car, 2 in the front, 3 in the back. My dad worked with other spiritual leaders across the reservation to find a way to make the car go away and give whoever was driving it peace. As my family was pretty open about supernatural phenomenon, and as we had all seen stuff that couldn't be explained, my dad let us know what was going on. As the number of ghosts appearing in the community school increased and the sightings of the black car rose, my dad grew very upset and worried. We felt like we were under siege. And kids kept committing suicide down by the creek. One night, when my dad was out somewhere, we heard a car approach the house. I had been reading in my bedroom, but I heard my mother tell my sisters to run to the back. My 2 younger sisters hurried into the room looking terrified, and we heard my baby brother's babbling stop completely. My mom would later tell me that she had moved to the big window that looked out in the front yard and peered out. It was the black car in our driveway, idling. My mom said her heart stopped when she recognized the hairstyle of one of the girls who had committed suicide. She could barely make her out through the tinted glass, but she knew who she was. My mom ran to the phone to call my dad, and as soon as she got him on the line, the car reversed with a screech and left our driveway. The car continued being seen, as well as other truly terrifying things, until the suicides halted and a town-wide ceremony was performed. That remains one of the most frightening periods of my life. When I was 12 years old, this was back in the late 70s, my parents were fighting and I didn't want to be at home, so I went to my best friend's house. We went to the living room and started watching television. The rest of the family kind of did whatever it was that they were doing. They all eventually went to bed. My friend started talking about this nightmare he had. He looked at me and started to yell, your eyes, they turn solid black!" And he jumped off the couch. He struggled for air for a moment and then just crumbled on the floor between the coffee table and the couch. It scared me, so I jumped out of the chair. I turned to my left and happened to look to my right for whatever reason, I don't know. There was a black digital clock on top of the television, and it said midnight right on the dot. It wasn't 12:01 or anything like that. It was right on the dot. So I took, 3 or 4 steps across the living room, skirted around the coffee table, bent down to touch my friend's shoulder to see what was going on, and as soon as I made contact with him, he was suddenly standing next to me, to my left, which didn't make any sense. It was a very odd transition, but he was suddenly standing and screaming, "What the hell happened? What the hell happened?" And I tried to calm him down. I thought he was going to wake his parents because I thought the time was still midnight. I looked at the TV again, and I saw the clock above it, and it was exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. 36 years later, I decided one day I wanted to know what happened to me. I just happened to be on some particular media, and I saw Yvonne Smith. So I went to Yvonne, and we talked for a while, so she got an idea of who I am, and it took 2 trips to hypnotic sessions to get all the details that I was going to get. She took me back to that night when I was at my friend's house and asked me to just describe everything that I experienced, everything I see, any details, just keep talking as the images come. The first thing I saw was a T-shaped thing, and I got really upset and started yelling. And the T-shaped thing turned out to be a kind of bed, but it's not really a bed, it's more of a platform. And I was laying on this thing, and my arms were out to my sides, and my wrists were bound to it somehow, but I couldn't feel anything on my wrist, but I couldn't raise them off of it. I could move my arms, just not my wrist. My ankles were the same way. The inside of this thing was metal. It was a dome ceiling, and there was a being standing next to me. It wore metal mesh clothing. It was robe-like, like cloth, but it was metal. And the reason I know this is because the sleeve dragged across my face, and I could see light glinting off the fibers. They had instruments that came out of the ceiling. One of those instruments looked like a black arm, and it unfolded out of the ceiling. The tip of it looked like a stinger, like the tip of a scorpion. They inserted it into my left nostril and pressed it all the way into my head, and it was excruciating pain. They brought in another device. It was cylindric. It had brass-like metal in layers, and they placed it on my left ear and inserted something into my ear, and again I heard crunching noises. They didn't seem to be aware or concerned about inflicting the pain. It seemed very mechanical to them. Their movements were slow and methodical, and it seemed like they didn't make mistakes. They had slightly larger than normal-looking heads. They had black eyes, and they had wrinkles on their face, which I thought was interesting. They appeared old. Their skin didn't look healthy. It looked grayish. They removed my stomach contents, whatever I had eaten. They took that stuff out. They took me to some place, and at some point there was no gravity. I was floating, but I was just being held down on the table by the points on my wrists and ankles. And they took me to this place where they removed me from the spacecraft. I'm assuming it was a spacecraft. I don't know what else to call it. I didn't see it from the outside, only from the inside. They stood me in front of a machine. It looked like a building. It was the biggest thing I'd ever seen. And it was covered in blue lights and had a lot of moving parts on it. I don't know what it was doing, but they took me away from there. And all I remember was coming back into the atmosphere. I remember feeling gravity pulling me back onto the table, the weight of everything coming back to me, and then there was a blur, and I still can't find out exactly what happened, but I ended up right back where I was standing, where my friend was. It was as if he was already standing, and they placed me there. Why are we so fascinated with the occult and the paranormal? Why do we put so much effort into ensuring that we experience the eeriness of the Halloween season? Sure, it could be because horror and fright allow us to obtain the adrenaline burst we desire without accepting that the true horrors don't lie in stories or movies, but within our minds and in our world. Or perhaps it is because this time offers us bonding that comes through shared fright. Or maybe there is a more sinister reason. Maybe the reason we love Halloween time so much is because little by little we have given in to the evil spirits and entities that scared the original worshippers of All Hallows Eve. Perhaps we love Halloween so much because unbeknownst to us, the spirits of All Hallows Eve command us to. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of our show. Tune in next week at the same time and on the same frequency for another episode. Be careful and cautious as you venture out this Halloween night, and may you all be brave enough to combat the spirits that roam so freely on this night. I've been your captain, Jose Valle, and this has been Captain's Log, and we've reached the end of our transmission. Happy Halloween.